We want to welcome you to Justice Forum, wherever you are throughout the United States and the world. We come here each week. We discuss relevant issues of great and grave concern to the world community. Today, we're going to be diving deeply into issues of economic, socio, and environmental justice in the world. And who better to discuss it with? It's a great privilege today to have with us Dr. Lisa Jordan. She is an associate teaching professor, environmental studies and public health in the biology department at the university. Drew University is where she's joining us from in Madison, New Jersey. I have a great degree of admiration for this professor, and I can tell you this is going to be a learning and a teaching moment. She's joining us from the forest. We regard Drew University as the forest. Good morning, Dr. Jordan. Welcome to the show. It's good to have you with us. How is campus, the student community? I haven't seen you since COVID, so
Good
the power of
morning,
technology.
David.
Yeah, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. The Drew campus is doing well. We're back together again in person and recovering from COVID, but it's, of course, still ongoing.
That's right, that's right. And the world is in turmoil in the midst of everything that is happening. These are conversations, in fact, we had. I remember in one of your classes, even before COVID hit, I was wondering, and I'm like, wow, this is probably a message that was coming to us, and we were looking at it from a theoretical standpoint, and COVID hit. Here we are. The war is indeed a different place, and this is why we thought it wise to have you with us this morning to have a conversation around socio-economic and environmental justice in the world. That is quite a big topic, but we want to see how we can streamline it from an American perspective, since you teach at one of the leading universities in the state of New Jersey. Environmental concerns, issues surrounding social and economic justice. How can we define it to begin this conversation with us today? As there are many who are indeed watching, listening. Could you define it, Professor, to take up the show?
Sure. I really see environmental justice as about participation in everyone in the decision-making process surrounding environmental issues. That means bringing everyone to the table and allowing everyone a chair at the table to talk about what's important to them and not make environmental decisions from elite statuses or without consent of people who are being affected by those decisions.
Yeah, consensus nowadays is hard to come by. The vitriol, the division, the stigmatization, everything associated what it is, something that has to do with making sure that we can live in an environment that is environmentally free, is accessible, and issues surrounding just a typical example, what COVID has taught us, how intrinsically interlinked and globally we are. That should be quite a clear example of what it is, as you've emphasized it. Now, my question is, why are we practically still in denial about what environmentalism, issues of socio and economic deprivation, the impact that it has on all of us and all of humanity, irrespective of where you are, either you are in the global north or you are in the global south?
That's a great question, Zaze, and one I ponder myself often. what limits our knowledge and understanding of how important the environment it is, how we are all connected to it, and how our care and treatment of the earth have different outcomes for different populations. Why are there inequities in access to things as basic as clean air, clean water, and access to affordable, healthy food? And I think the sad answer that I've come to is that a lot of folks see the environment as a resource, as something to extract from and just sell. And there's a lot of moneyed interests in, you know, getting oil, coal, fuel, and circulating it. And so that puts the environment in a difficult place because there are more folks who are advocates for extraction from environmental systems than for the earth systems themselves. So it's difficult because these issues definitely impact us globally, but we're not hearing the information we need to about why those systems are so important, because they're also very they're very important to the pockets of a lot of companies.
Okay. Economic persuasion has a role to play with that. And it brings me to the question of just the recent train derailment in Palestine, Ohio, just next door to us. I sit here from Western Pennsylvania, and that has occurred from the very company two times now. And there are lives that have been affected. It comes on the news, and in the twinkling of an eye, it disappears, and we move on to living this busy life. But environmentally, as COVID has taught us, COVID is still with us. The traumatization, the psychological impacts it has had on us, not within only the global south or the global north, but especially in the global north, we have had a very terrible experience. And I wondered how political it has become, us versus them. Instead of looking at the science, as you have stipulated here quite clearly, that people can continue to be in denial. But COVID is real, and many lives were lost. And even as we speak, many are still hampered. Many have suffered. Many are traumatized. The considerable degree of isolation that we find ourselves in, and those of us within the therapeutic community, within the religious community, those of us who are engaged with parishioners, community leaders, community organizers, we can vividly see, because these are things that we see on a daily basis, as to the many struggles ordinary people, ordinary folks are experiencing. Talk about that.
I agree with you completely. COVID has been a traumatic experience. It is, we are continuing to live in with this trauma, and its impact has been unequal in the United States and globally. It is unfair how our health systems have distributed access to vaccines and promoted communications about COVID. And you're right, it's politicized, and it's politicized in such a harmful way, and tying it with identity. And we're all hurt. Everyone's life expectancy declined by COVID, but not all hurt equally. And we know this in our communities, that there's those differences which are unjust. And the important thing is doing exactly what you're doing, in my opinion, is speaking the truth. This has been unequal. It's been harmful. We are traumatized. We are still traumatized, and we need healing from what COVID has done and is continuing to do, and to think about different ways to move forward in the United States, but globally as well, to make sure people have equal access to vaccines that they need to protect them, to other protective equipment. But it has shed a bright light in the United States on the persistence of deep inequalities.
In your classes, I vividly remember some of those conversations around social justice. You are also a professor within the area of public health. Just the fact that we cannot exist without the environment. I mean, that's just a brutal reality that many people have come to realize, irrespective of the economic interests that people have, taking economic interests far more than the environmental interests. Until when hair broke loose during the time and the period as we are in now, those of us within the theological cycle call it a liminal season, a season where we actually do not know what is next, where are we going, what's going to happen. We keep pressing on and giving assurances within the context of faith that it will be well. But America, as it is, as powerful as it is, when I get into the streets and I see veterans who sleep on the street, interact with homeless people who don't have the capacity to go probably to a shelter tonight during the school season, who don't have a meal to eat, that becomes mind-boggling for a person who lives in the global south with this media expectation that is being conveyed to them as to the land in which we live that is prosperous, a land of milk and honey, but in the midst of it, in the cracks, oh, there are millions of our brothers and sisters who are lingering, who are suffering, who are challenged, who don't have the possibility of being a part of this particular American experience or this American pie that is visualized within the context of media, social media itself, within the film industry as to what it is, who we are in America. Can you talk about that, Professor?
I think what you're saying is so important to hear. Uh, there's poverty in the United States. There is a crisis with affordable housing. There are many people unhoused who are not getting their basic human needs met in the United States. We think of the United States as a stereotype globally, a wealthy country, a land of opportunity. But the reality, as you are witnessing in our streets and communities, is oftentimes a lack of compassion for all people, and also the lack of capacity to care for all people. And so this is absolutely something that we are struggling with in the United States and have struggled with. I feel grateful for your program and other radio programs that are shining a light on these problems, because they are problems. We have to stop the myth of some sort of US on the Hill perfectionism of opportunity, because there are deep inequities and I would say human rights violations where people's basic needs are not being met.
So, what are those conversations like within your classroom, within the context of the classroom, within the context of training those those who hold the future leaders, those who are going to be key players within not only the environmental context but the economic and the social justice piece that comes with it? What are some of those debates that you are encountering now? We were talking about this in hindsight. It was theoretical, but we can see it vividly. And I think what experience has taught us, seeing is believing. And the debates stay continuing as to what are some of those steps that we need to take, not only within the teaching community, but to begin to do more vigorously within the respective communities, that awareness is created, because a lot of times people are in denial. Not only that, social media has become so complex and complicated with nuances that sometimes some of the variables or the ideologies that are being opined ideologically and strategically from a scientific standpoint, not real.
Hmm.
They are propaganda.
In US college classrooms, we are dealing with addressing the same kind of stereotypes that may be observable globally. The US educational system has not been perfect in shedding a light on the sources of systemic inequalities that exist in the United States. When students leave the curriculums from kindergarten through high school in the United States and enter college, it's oftentimes the first time they have access to a broader set of information and opportunities to debate in the classroom about causes and consequences of contemporary inequalities in the United States. So it often begins with an understanding and assessment of what they didn't have access to before, understanding US history of colonialism, of enslavement of people, and what that has meant over time, including Jim Crow, often excluded from US curricula, to let's talk now about where we move from where we go from here. And so our conversations are first about sort of a consciousness raising and eye opening of what the US is, and ideas for how we can move forward for a more just society. I teach community-based learning courses where students commit time to service work outside of the classroom, and that's where I think that practical access to knowledge happens, is when you work in a food pantry in the United States, then you understand we have a crisis in food security. When you work with environmental organizations that are resisting the construction of new power plants in low income and minority communities, and you realize, oh, the way we've planned and developed our infrastructure in the past has been built on prejudice. And so it's through working with community and engaging readings that are challenging to sort of traditional conceptions of history in the United States, and it gives us access to talk about social justice and a way forward.
Yeah, social justice becomes a cold word and sometimes a very fearful word that people are in denial of what the realities are. I even struggle with that as a person who migrated to these shows some 22 years ago in the midst of a war in West Africa. Today, I can proclaim and profess that I'm an American. That's the goodness of America. But within the historicity of it, the reality exists that we need to bring to fore the understanding of what has transpired in the past, to understand where we are and how we can be able to build a promising future, a future that incorporates all. Because as long as there is global migration, as long as there are systemic structures that continue to oppress people, marginalized people, indigenous people, globally, and if conglomerates that only have the interest within the economic context to exploit the resources of ordinary people, of indigenous people, but leave their lands devastated, then it becomes a problematic proposition to know that we are interconnected. And if these things are taking place in one part or the other of the world, what affects one affects all. That chain eventually, from what you taught us, Professor, I remember quite well, is shared. And as a result, migration takes place. And people wonder, well, why are people leaving from this part of the world and they are doing everything to cross the high seas? And some, in fact, in the process become victims. I mean, these are the underlying intricacies, the interlinking of it, and how structurally they are all systemic and they produce an effect that is that residual effect that is affecting us. Well, thinking that, well, okay, COVID started in China, but it was not an American problem. And failing to realize that we were indeed connected globally. And within a split seconds, what happens? There are thousands of Chinese and tourists and others who are flying. They are taking over Europe, and before America could realize it, COVID was already here. Isn't the reality where we are? Why can't we learn from history? Why can't we learn from you as professor? Why can't we learn from the technicians those who hold the incredible, the impeccable knowledge as to what it is that is prevailing. Why would we continue to be between these wars where this divide and rule mentality exists and at the expense of the common man, the common woman, the marginalized communities? The debates continue. And, I was watching news the other day when this whole train derailment took place in Palestine, Ohio. The conversation was, where do you take the waste? And this other state is saying, no, we don't want to hear. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is where we are. And I started to look back to say, okay, these are some of the debates and issues that Professor Jordan would talk about. What are those experiences also for students who are doing those community projects, beginning to see, to have an eye-opening understanding as to how systemic these issues are, depending on where you are, what side of the aisle you are, what is prevailing, but to look at it from a real cognitive standpoint, a social justice standpoint, to realize that what affects one affects all. It may be taking place in Palestine, Ohio, or if it's on the American news, a lifespan of what? Less than 2 minutes, it's gone away. And we go back to normal.
Right. I think that it feels like these kind of disasters are part of our deal with modernity, that to have the contemporary products and internet access and technology, that the costs are random disasters that disrupt and destroy communities. And it's important, what we see in Ohio is a lot of people gathering and saying, no, we have to find a better way. We have to make changes in the policies that permitted this to happen. And for each disaster like that, there needs to be rallying around those communities most affected and real pressure for change, because we shouldn't have to accept sacrifice zones, as they're sometimes called. We shouldn't have to accept that people, land, places, wildlife, rivers are worth disregarding, are not worth, are of no value, that are expendable, that are something that becomes waste because of our modern systems of consumption. There are better ways to do things. And I think that kind of transformation is possible. And I love the points you've been making about how everything is connected. What happens in China affects human health globally, right? What happens in Ohio affects everyone. It is disappointing that it's a flash that gets attention and then seems to disappear. But what we know too, as you said, by being educated in a community-based learning setting, is that there is a day 2 and a day 3 and a day 4 and a time period that happens after the disaster when many community volunteers continue to work on these issues. Over winter break, I went with students to New Orleans, Louisiana, in the United States, in the Southeast, and we volunteered with a long-term recovery organization called lower9.org. And their whole idea was, after Hurricane Katrina, which was many, many years ago, the students I went with were children when Katrina happened. There's still ongoing recovery in the lower ninth ward to restore homes, but also restore people who have been deeply traumatized, not by just Katrina, but multiple hurricanes and disinvestment in community. And so there is an effort. If we're moving to that more just society, it means being there on day 2, day 3, day 4, not just the day we see it on the news, but an ongoing commitment to restoring people, restoring their communities, restoring our natural systems.
Yeah, Hurricane Katrina. You take me all the way back, and I'm just reflecting, challenging as it was. I was just arriving in this country then, and if that has persisted for so long, and it has made people to move to other parts, just how challenging and how devastating environmental degradation is what it brings to the community, the destruction, the traumatization. I think this is quite an enlightening engagement. And I indicated in the bike that we will want to have Professor Jordan to join us from time to time on the Justice Forum. Those of you who are just tuning in, we want to welcome you to the Justice Forum on the Christian Vision Broadcasting Network. We transmit to you today from Western Pennsylvania. Professor Jordan happens to be associate teaching professor, environmental studies and public health in the biology department. She's speaking to us from Madison, New Jersey. The forest, indeed an incredible place, a place of higher learning, a place of engagement where the global community meets. I am hoping to return to campus prayerfully sometime early next year. But this is quite an interesting and fascinating conversation. What is it from the governmental standpoint? What assessment can you make for us in terms of the current administration? Is it working in line with the environmental movement? Those of you who are environmentalists, those within the context of the social justice movement, trying to bring light, to share a light on what's happening in the dark, and for communities to be aware. What are some of those reference points that you can be able to give to us today for people who are watching, people who are listening, who have interest within this context of environmental, economic, and social justice within the global community, but especially with specific emphasis on the American perspective? Where do we stand? And maybe my follow up to that would be, is the environmental movement itself, is the justice movement itself, is it playing its pivotal role that it needs to play to ensure those checks and balances are there to hold leaders' feet to the fire, to ensure that they can serve and serve well and serve their communities, because those are it's for that purpose that they come asking the people to have them re-elected or elected every 2, 4, or 9 years.
I think a lot of environmentalists in the US today are disappointed. I believe generally, since the Trump administration was so hostile to environmentalists in terms of, bringing in the CEO of Exxon for the State Department leadership, bringing in industry insiders into the EPA. It was a very, very hostile time for environmentalists during those years. But the promise of new administration has not been as progressive as many environmentalists have hoped. There's open drilling now in the Arctic. There are a lot of compromises being made for ongoing fossil fuel investments in the United States. And there's a little bit of disappointment that there isn't more effort on truly a Green New Deal in which there's massive transformation of US energy systems. It seems like we're still living with a lot of legacy energy projects. That said, I also feel that the environmental broad movements have still struggled to integrate environmental justice and the work of social justice. And I do appreciate that there is an increasing recognition of the importance of environmental and social justice. But from what I hear from that leadership, we have excellent environmental justice leadership in New Jersey and Newark with the Ironbound, with the New Jersey Environmental Justice Association, with a number of extraordinary advocates. They've expressed their discontent with the current Biden administration in really defending frontline communities from exploitation. So there's remains a lot of work to be done. And I would generally say there's disappointment on the broad movement and then also the specific movement for environmental justice. But there's no giving up. If you work and are invested in these areas, the earth matters. Everything's connected. It's going to affect us. And so you feel an obligation to keep moving forward. Um, and hope to continue to pressure organizations. So we don't have some kind of consensus on fossil fuel use and a consensus on extraction, but a focus on protection of the earth and its natural systems. And the people that depend on them.
Yeah, that's right. And the Green New Deal, my is that the way to the future, Professor? Even in the midst of all of the debates and all that we have, is that the way to the future that we can depend on solar energy? I just returned from West Africa, and I have a very interesting experience in terms of the power consumption that ordinary people have to endure, have to experience on a daily basis, and the cost attached to it. And I decided to go a little solar, and I saw a big difference in terms of how much was being spent within the context and the time of a 1 month period that I stay touring parts of Liberia. I think solar energy is efficient. I'm not in any way engaged with any solar group or not, but I mean, I'm just speaking from my own experience. And instead of using fuel, which was quite costly when I spent about a month out of this country. The way to the future, the Green New Deal is the way to the future in the midst of all of the resistance. Is that what I'm hearing you to say?
I think you're right to be critical. It is a transformation, not just in the energy systems, but in a way of business altogether. And it is aspirational to pursue a true Green New Deal where we treat people and environmental resources as valuable. And that itself does have its cost in terms of economic convenience that we're accustomed to. So I think you're totally right to be critical, and that there's no direct substitution without transformation. There is no direct substitution of existing energy systems without transforming the way consumption happens as it does right now. And that is asking for, in some cases, painful transition for some people who feel very comfortable with those systems that exist. So it is, it's not an easy request for a change.
That's
For
right.
sure.
Change itself is hard. And in respect to that, what we eat is quite important. I won't like to forget about that as we have this conversation around socioeconomic and environmental justice in the world. I was thinking about just how affordable organic food is within the American context. And looking back to areas in which organic food is easily accessible. But those who eat organic food where it is easily accessible, the aspirational dreams they have is that being on the American coast, as portrayed by the media, is probably the best place to be. Talk to me a little in an educational sense about all of what we are experiencing within the context of what we eat. Who affords it? Where can you find it? The vulnerability associated with what we eat, where the foods are coming from, and how environmentally safe they are, that are bringing all of these challenges and difficulties. You are in the area of public health. Who can afford to go to the Walmart? Who can afford to go to Whole Foods? There's a lot that it costs within a day if you are an average buyer from Whole Foods as compared to the person who goes to the Walmart? Talk about that.
So from one major system in trouble, our whole energy enterprise, our whole energy systems, to another, global food systems are an extraordinary challenge we have environmentally and socially moving forward. In the United States, many of us are dispossessed from our ability to make and grow our own food. And for now, I think for me, multi-generationally, since my great great grandparents were all farmers, that the knowledge that came with farming and growing your own food has been lost for many people living in the United States. And so for many folks today in the US, we rely on our industrial agricultural system to supply us with food. And it's a global system, as you're pointing out. So who makes our food is people all over the world, but also a small proportion of people in the United States providing most people in the US with their food. And a lot of these techniques are through massive industrial farming techniques, which have a significant impact on our natural systems and on human health, as we're discovering more and more, based on the types of increasingly processed foods that we are eating. And there's a slow movement trying to restore agricultural knowledge in communities through urban gardening and farming. A lot of students, maybe people in global perspective would be surprised by this, but a lot of US students coming to university are interested in learning agriculture and how to grow their own food. And it's lost knowledge, so it's a struggle to recover that information, the diversity, like how seeds work, how to plant, how to grow. And we have a small community garden at Drew University.
That's right. That's right.
And we have gardens in town, and there's this interest in recovering that we call it food sovereignty, that ability to make your own food and provide for yourself and to understand where food comes from. But this represents only a teeny fraction of the proportion of food people have access to. And so food is a major concern to address environmentally and in terms of social justice. You're right. Where can we find inexpensive food? Well, we can find it at Walmart. We can find it's still expensive. It's still very expensive, and a lot of people are food insecure. And you can go to the fast food restaurants, also, in my opinion, very expensive. So I think our struggle is because we've been dispossessed from our way to make our own food, we're in a real tough spot. A lot of people feel they have to pay an increasing proportion of their income to get food that doesn't nourish them as it should. And it's also a crime in global perspective, thinking about all the folks who export food so that folks in the United States can have access to food as well. And then, of course, all agricultural politics in the U.S. are subsidies of wheat and corn and unfair pricing of those products in global systems, which honestly is stealing from the world's farmers who are putting their labor into really important products, for survival of people, but not getting adequately compensated because of the economic system, the global agricultural economic system. So another major challenge. I think of, so my great uncle talks about my grandmother, great grandmother, raising a growing farm, growing her radishes on the arid plains of Colorado. And he remembers her saying, this is opportunity. This is opportunity to have a place to grow your own food. And he didn't see it that way. He thought, oh, it's not worth it. And I think that happened intergenerationally for many Americans, the denigration of food growing, the choice to leave to the cities for a better life and to lose the knowledge that came with cultivating land and growing your own food. And I think of he went to work with Martin Marietta, now Lockheed Martin, you know, the defense industry. And I thought, oh, I wish I had that connection back to my great grandmother. I wish I could see her opportunity and learn to grow the foods that she knew how to grow. So we have a lot of relearning, restoration, healing to work on in the United States in terms of food.
Yeah, that's right. And within the global context, those of you who are joining us in parts of wherever you are in the world, those who live in the tropics, I grew up a son of farmers, and I know the importance of what food is and how intrinsically linked to our own survival it is that if we can grow our own food. I have tried to encourage many, even as we speak. I have had the opportunity to return to visit, and my father was a great farmer. My mother was, and trying to see how some of these farms that were devastated by the war, displacement, and people fled, but beginning to encourage our people to understand that growing your own food is an incredible source of empowerment, especially when those foods that you grow are organic, natural, they are God given, and it doesn't have any inclusion of preservatives, fertilizer, and the rest of it, as others have to do in other parts of the world, especially those of us who live here, as Professor Jordan has indicated. We're going to be wrapping up this show, Professor Jordan. From a social justice standpoint, I want you to clearly define for me who is an American, because this debate continued to be a persistent debate within the context of the American political pathology as to who is. And as far as I know, as far as I read, many of us have come here through the trenches of migration. And I was talking to an Indian scholar. I'm talking about Indian American scholar. And I said, well, there's so much debate that goes on in this land, in this our land. I'm wondering, what do you guys make of it? Those of you who are the original Aborigines from here. You just laugh. Okay, so I raised the question to you, Professor Jordan, before we wrap up this show. For the sake of our audience, tell me within the social justice context, who is an American?
Oh, you leave me with a hard one. So I suppose I should begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the land that was originally stewarded by the Lenni Lenape peoples. And the original native inhabitants are the original peoples of this land. And there might not be a wish to use the word American in that context. From my perspective, I think anyone on these lands, if you wish to be an American, you are an American. I advocate for open borders. I know aspirational. I'm all aspirational, but in my opinion, it's a human right to move where you want to move. And so that's something I advocate for. I think that our immigration system is inhumane, and I would love to see it removed. I think it's criminal what the US government does to folks on the borders. So I would say, if you would like to be an American, you are an American, but that's a consensus building process, and I understand I don't have the unified perspective on that.
That's right. Yeah, America is an idea. And if we can look at it from that perspective, I think you are quite right. We're so grateful to have you with us today, Professor Jordan. Those of you who have joined us for this interesting and fascinating conversation, we've been looking at socio-economic and environmental justice in the world. This is a very huge topic, seeking an American perspective. Who better to discuss it with? Dr. Lisa Jordan is Associate Teaching Professor, Environmental Studies and Public Health in the Biology Department at Drew University. She joins us from Madison, in New Jersey. We are going to do the best we can to ensure that we can have Professor Jordan to join us, so that we can be able to chronologically discuss some of these issues. Maybe the next time, Professor Jordan, when we have you, we want to see how we can dive more deeply into homelessness in America. The experience and the challenges, the difficulties associated with it. Let's deconstruct it and to bring some clarity. And the myth, there are many, especially within the global audience, who probably might be on the other side having an organic dinner, thinking the grass is greener on this side, and not understanding the intricacies, what comes with migration, the challenges associated with it, the difficulties that people encounter when people are so desperate. You indicated that it's a human right for anyone who desire to move. And I think necessity produces that. When people are in need, they are challenged, there's a war, there is a crisis. We all know how difficult and challenging that can be, but humanity in general will always fight to survive one way or the other, either it means that they have to move from one point to another. We want to thank you. It's been a quite interesting conversation here today on the show. Let's get a parting statement from you. I know you have to get back to class and that you have a very tight schedule. Let's get a closing statement from you, Professor.
Thank you so much for having me on the program today. It's been a joy to talk with you. For me, one thing that really I learned from you is that we always benefit from thinking about those perspectives nationally, internationally, and coming into conversation with each other. And I learn from you, and you kindly say we learn from each other. So I would say keep it going. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep talking about it. And I would love to rejoin your program in the future.
Oh, yes. We are surely going to have you. We want to thank you. We want to say a big thank you to the Drew University family. You play a very pivotal role within that global space, bringing students from all walks of life. We don't want to forget that. The tremendous contribution and inspiration you've brought to us. We take that from you and we are running with it and praying that as we go along, as we collaborate, we are all intrinsically linked. And the struggle for justice, equity, for social and economic empowerment will continue. But it was a great, great pleasure having you with us today. And enjoy the rest of the day, the rest of the weekend. Give our thanks and appreciation and heartfelt felicitation to the Drew community, Morristown community, and New Jersey at large. Thanks for joining us, Professor.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye. I want to thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Our special guest was Dr. Lisa Jordan, Associate Teaching Professor, Environmental Studies and Public Health in the Biology Department at Drew University. The topic under discussion today is social economic and environmental justice in the world, seeking an American perspective. I want to thank you. It's good that we had this engaging conversation. It's good that you were part of it. We want to use this opportunity to ask you to join us again, prayerfully, on the Justice Forum. We'll be back. And by full disclosure, we will be here tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. This time, we will be looking at justice, human rights, and the state of good governance in the Republic of Liberia. Our special guest, Councillor Jerome Verdiert. He will be in the hot seat here tomorrow on the Justice Forum. Until we can see you again, when we see you, remember the way to sustaining democracy, the way to ensuring equity, to bringing about peace and justice in the world is to make sure that we, as a people and as a community, continue to shadow, to continue to love, to continue to engage one another through peaceful conversations, conversations that have the great desire and the commitment to make the world a better place. Take care. Zeze Wepugipara is the name. We'll see you again sometime tomorrow. 6 p.m. tomorrow. This is information for you. 6 p.m. tomorrow, Eastern Standard Time. Join us for Justice Forum. We'll be back here. Our special guest this time, Councillor Jerome Verdiert. The conversation on the discussion topic, the state of good governance, justice, and human rights in the West African state of Liberia. Take care, brothers and sisters. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.